Russia often surprises us, but sometimes it produces coincidences that are simply too hard to believe. Consider two senior Russian army colonels who both fell from windows in two different cities on the exact same day. Now, Moscow would call that simply bad luck, but in the West, we know what this really is. This is a cleanup, and there is something inside the system that is being scrubbed fast. But more and more, we see that what the Russians call a corruption policing effort has started to look more and more like state directed seizure. War pressure creates the motive. The state needs cash and it needs silence at the same time. Money is seized through courts and anti corruption cases. Records are controlled by removing the people who can trace contracts, files, and digital trails. And that is why the targets cluster around two groups of people, those with budget access and those with evidence that can be used in court. And there is a pattern of how these attacks typically play out. The opening move is simple: strip the target's protection, and then let the investigators move in. But then comes the cleanup phase, and officials with access to contracts and files keep ending up on the pavement after falls from high windows. And in one case, an investigator, a colonel, connected to digital forensic evidence, he survived a 12-meter or 40-foot fall. Now, after a fall like that, you can be pretty sure that colonel will not be investigating what is meant to be left unsaid. Now, clearly, the anti-corruption label is the public story, but the real objective? It is control of assets and control of records. War spending pressure in 2025 is demanding fast money, not slow trials. Courts and cases have become leverage, and this is how a regime funds itself when ordinary tools have begun failing, when things are simply becoming out of control. I'm Dr. Jason Smart, a national security advisor and a special correspondent for the Kyiv Post. If you want the facts of what is happening inside of Russia, a country that blacklisted me more than a third of my life ago, and what is really going on across the globe's allied authoritarian regimes, then please subscribe now, as we'll be going deep into what is really transpiring that is rarely in the headlines. Look at the case of what we see in Tambov. It was quite interesting. On November 4th, 2024, Governor Maxim Yegorov resigned. He claimed that his leadership was needed in Moscow for more important tasks. Rumors pointed to a position inside of United Russia, the political party of Vladimir Putin. That job would have functioned like a shield. A job in the party machinery raises the political cost of arresting him, and it would slow down any investigation against him. A promotion would have placed him inside of a protected structure of Moscow. But instead, the federal task that he thought he was about to receive never showed up. The shield never arrived. And it was during that period between the new job and the old job that he was in a state of limbo. And that is when he was a defenseless target. On July 24th, 2025, he was detained in Tambov and then transported to Moscow under heavy guard. The investigative committee and the Russian Federal Security Services, the FSB, they searched his homes. And the courts decided that he had committed abuse of power and bribery on an especially large scale. Pretrial detention followed in Moscow's district court for 2 months. Now, the timing here is key. As Governor Yegorov was close to a major Moscow promotion, immunity would have saved him had he just started that new job a little bit sooner. In Russia, paperwork can function as armor, but in this case, the armor arrived too late. But following his exit, Yevgeny Pervyshov became the new governor. Pervyshov himself serves as a perfect example of what Russia has become. He lacks civilian management credentials. However, he is a veteran of the war in Ukraine. Loyalty to the Putin regime and loyalty under fire has become more valuable in Russia than competence under audit. But what we're seeing has historical legacy. Russian power has always operated on two currencies: fear and paper. Monarchs ruled by decree. Authority flowed from written orders backed by violence. The Soviet system ruled by party files. Control meant owning the dossier. The modern Kremlin rules by court folders and security service stamps. Legality is manufactured through documents. And in the Soviet system, there was Kompromat, which was truly part of the governance, not just pure gossip. Kompromat means the collection of compromising material about one's opponents. Every official lived inside of a permanent dossier. Files could be opened, edited, or weaponized on command. Loyalty was enforced through stored evidence. Survival depended on silence. But post-Soviet Russia has kept the same logic, though they've changed some of the tools. Today, they don't use filing cabinets, but databases. Control scaled faster. We see that phone extractions have replaced informants and surveillance has become automated. Today, there is a lot going on inside of Russia that harkens back to the Soviet days by all the means that they try to use to make sure that their population is totally controlled, that nobody in the population operates without Moscow having an eye on them. But specifically now, things have gotten more extreme. War turns this system into a meat grinder. Sanctions squeeze revenue. External cash becomes harder to reach. Battlefield losses raise spending, and military costs accelerate. All of this forces the state to look for money. Domestic assets thereby become targets. Now, asset seizure becomes a financial weapon. We see that seizures are not only about punishing theft, they convert private infrastructure into war infrastructure. Ports, fuel terminals, logistic contracts, and transport budgets become strategic terrain. Economic nodes become military assets. Control the tender system, and you control payments. Cash flow becomes loyalty enforcement. Control the courts, and you can take assets legally. Ownership changes without any gunfire being exchanged. Silence is the second requirement, though. A seizure only works if responsibility cannot travel upward. Approval chains must stay hidden. Paper cannot climb to the very top because accountability is the enemy. Evidence specialists, though, are another specific threat, a danger to this sort of a government. They are the sort of people, these experts, that can connect dots that the propaganda cannot erase. Facts simply outlive narratives. Digital forensics can reconstruct deleted chats. Erasure is rarely complete, and that's why contract records can always be found. And those records, no matter what you've done to delete them, will show whose signature is there, who is really responsible for this contract. And that's where you can figure out very quickly who took the cut from the contract. Theft leaves patterns and it can be detected. And that's why windows keep appearing. A fall ends testimony. Death solves the evidence problem. Both halves put together are just one window to the same Russia. The corrupt are liabilities because they know where the money went. The investigators are liabilities because they can prove where the money went. Different roles, same danger to the same regime. And that is why both sides get thrown away when the machine tightens. You know what else has put pressure on the Kremlin, though? Drones and supplies for Ukraine soldiers. Check out the first pinned comment where you'll see, right under the question of the day, how you too can help the Ukraine soldiers get life-saving drones to defeat the Putin regime. Thank you. So take a look, though, at the case of Aleksei Panov. He was found dead on the pavement outside of the Sheraton Hotel at Moscow's airport. Now, investigators moved quickly to decide it was obviously just a suicide. Fedotov, though, had chaired the St. Petersburg Committee on Transport Infrastructure Development. That committee handled multi-billion ruble infrastructure contracts, the kind of contracts that everybody wants, and those that don't get become lifelong enemies. Now, note that he was involved in transport. And what happened about the same time? Well, Transport Minister Roman Starovoyt was found dead, allegedly, of course, by suicide, just hours after being fired by Putin. But want to hear another incredible coincidence? It was Starovoyt's right hand, the deputy minister, who just days later had a massive heart attack and died. Thus, the criminal investigation into all of them came to a conclusion. But there's something else here. Some reporting had suggested that Fedotov was preparing to leave the country. Other reporting suggested a summons for a final interview connected to the transport corruption case. But in all these cases, we see the same thing. When there's no man, there's no case. But look at the case of Dagestan. That provides the cleanest proof of motive that it's all about money. In June 2025, we saw more than 50 simultaneous raids across the region and in Moscow. The target this time was Magomed Sultan Magodemev, age 69. He was the state secretary of Dagestan. Now, agents of the Russian Federal Security Service, the FSB, were flown in from Moscow in secret. Local police were reportedly kept in the dark to prevent leaks. The asset that was being targeted this time was one that was quite important. In fact, it was an oil transport hub located at a Dagestani seaport. The value was assessed at $1.2 billion. Not surprisingly, there was a lightning court hearing that took place, and it was decided that nationalization of the entire oil complex was necessary in a process that took less than 24 hours. The release of Magomedev came within one day, so he didn't have a long prison grind. But his refusal to contest the charges, to contest the fact that they were going to take his assets, it served like his signature on a surrender document. But it is not just in Russia that we see this trend. Look what we've seen just in the past few days as Russia's cleanup efforts have gone international. Just in the past week, we saw Captain Aleksei Panov, a Russian military spy, who was found dead inside the Russian embassy in Cyprus. Panov was not visiting Cyprus just for fun. He was part of Russia's overseas financial and security infrastructure. But what else happened in Cyprus just days before? Well, Vladislav Baumgertner, who vanished in Cyprus at their main commercial port. Now, what's interesting is that this is what a cleanup looks like when money and records sit outside of Moscow's reach. But what makes Cyprus different is what it represents to the Kremlin. It is a hub for Russian offshore assets, shadow accounting, and sanctioned cash flow. But ultimately, killing and disappearing people abroad is a signal that there is fear inside of Moscow, that at the center, things are not going well. When we put the full chain together, the weaknesses become ever more visible. Inside of Russia, assets are seized and officials fall out of windows. Outside of Russia, embassy officers die and financial operators vanish. A confident regime does not need this level of internal violence to survive. This is a house of cards, and every cleanup is proof that this structure is already failing. This is sovereign cannibalism, and it comes at a measurable cost. Competence drains when managers are removed faster than they can be replaced. We see today that fear is rising and seizures are becoming normalized. Silence is spreading because everybody knows an open window could be the last one you see. Short-term cash is replacing long-term capacity. But what matters now is where this pressure will next move. Systems under this kind of strain do not stabilize. They spread risk outward. When cleanup reaches embassies, offshore hubs, and logistics corridors, the next step is wider exposure. The question is no longer who gets removed, it is which node will fail next. There's a lot going on right now in Russia that does not make it into the headlines. But click on the video that's now on the screen. You'll see for yourself what's really happening. As always, thank you for supporting Ukraine.